or when it's going to take. Guys, we're live. Welcome, welcome. It is Friday night and we are here. Well, we have the guy, the man of the future. It's Saturday already. We're here. It is daytime. We have Roger Pice with us. We are so excited about this talk today. We're going to wait a couple minutes until people come in. We're on a couple minutes delay. That's what I was saying earlier. So if we're talking over here, we don't see the questions. It's because people are just now logging in. So welcome everybody, Airway Circle, Facebook Live on Friday. I'm going to go ahead and introduce the speaker. But right before I do have to remind you guys that we may not know who you are whenever you're asking a question. So if you would like us to say your name, please type your name right before the question. And I would like everybody that's watching live to write the word priceless on the comment. And I'm going to tell you why. Because Mr. Priceless over here, I'm going to rename you, Roger. You taught us the other day on Clubhouse the exercise with your fingers, and I'm jumping ahead over here. The one that you touch the middle fingers, I wrote that on my exercise list that I give to my patients, and I named it Priceless. After you, but okay, let me go ahead and start, guys. We have Roger Pice. He has more than 60 years experience in multiple areas of health, with 20 plus years dedicated to dental, orthodontic, and sleep professions. He's the creator of a concept of breathing disordered sleep, which explains the multiple issues that people have which are independent of sleep. He is the creator and producer of the e-course Demystifying the Airway, which, if you guys have not seen it yet, I signed up for it the other day. And I was actually going to ask you today who is producing it for you, because it is beautiful. It is such a good course. And I'm going to post on Airway Circle group so you guys can get the link for it. But welcome, Roger.
Thank you very much, Renata. And good whatever it is to all of you, depending on where you are. So, Socrates was a great guy. He was sadly a mouth breather, but that didn't stop him from saying a few very interesting things which form the basis of logical and critical thinking. He said, use reason, not doctrine. And in this world that we're in today of double-blinded, randomized, controlled, placebo-controlled, Cochrane-reviewed, meta-analyzed research, that is doctrine, that is not reason. Then he said, interview until contradiction. So let people go with what they say until they start contradicting themselves. Don't jump in first, trying to tell them things that they might not even be interested in listening to. And of course, the third and the most important one is to look beyond the obvious. And that is what we're going to be doing for the next hour or so. So greetings to you from Sydney, Australia, one of the most beautiful cities in the world. It's Saturday morning on June the 5th. It's 10 o'clock plus. It's the middle of winter and it's 72 degrees with the sun shining.
Oh, my
Hey,
goodness.
it doesn't get much better than this. Right. Australia is a big country. I don't know if you realize that it's the size of the United States.
Wow.
And it's a huge country with a total population half of California.
Wow.
So that gives you a bit of an idea as to what we deal with. I live over here, which is Sydney, which is on the East Coast. The city has 256 beaches. It's paradise. It really is. So just to expand on Renata's overview, I graduated in 1960 from Rhodes University in Grahamstown in South Africa. So I've had 60 years of experience in education and training in multiple fields, which interestingly enough are all connected. Not one of these fields is a silo in its own right. All of these things are connected. And for the last 20 years, I've been lecturing to the major training institutes and universities and organizations around the world. And the amount of times that people look and say, but that makes so much sense. Why didn't I know that? Then in 2016, I was very honored to be presented with a Lifetime Award for the development of functionalism. And this was the International Functionality Association in Turin. So, of
Wow.
course, we have to have a disclaimer. By the way, can you see the mouse?
Yes, we can.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure it was working. And the disclaimer is that this is not advice or modality or any treatment. It's a discussion. It's a discussion to open your minds so that you can move away from the way you normally think. And that is where we are today on Friday, June the 4th, with Airway Circle. And Renata, you've done such a brilliant job here. Everything is so exciting about it. Everything is bubbling. People are excited. And it's wonderful to see such an open sharing of thoughts and ideas. So the question is, do we have a healthcare system? By its very definition, this process should care for health by being vigilant. This requires an investigation process which is incompatible with the current medical model, whose role it is to manage the diseases. By the time you get to see the doctor, you are already sick. So we're going to use a broad brush approach. And detail is understood more easily if it's viewed in the broader context. This will cover the reality of the current situation and the existing outcomes. And in the world of disrupted sleep, which is the area in which I specialize, it is back to front. People do not wake up because they can't sleep. They wake up because they can't breathe. And if you look at your two gold standards in managing sleep disorders, they are breathing devices. They're not sleep devices. So this question of sleep disordered breathing being the passion and the word of the decade, the last 5 decades, it's not correct. Sleep does not disorder breathing unless breathing is already compromised in the first place. So that's when I came up with the concept of breathing disordered sleep, which explains the phenomenon much more simply. You wake up in the middle of the night because you cannot breathe. And if you don't wake up, you die. It's that simple. Okay, so we're going to look at the two distinct problem areas. Ken Hooks touched on one yesterday, and that is treating the people who are already sick. Well, that is critical. It's not working that well, by the way, and we'll come to that shortly. Then we want to have a look at the reasons for this, and then finally, we want to look at a solution. What can we do to address this? Because I think it was one of the presidents who said, grumbling about something, talking about something without offering a solution is whinging or whining. And that's what we want to get away from. So the reality is we don't have a healthcare system. We're not investigating processes. People are already sick when they come into the system. What we have is a disease management business, which by its very definition relies on a variety of surgical, drug, and interventional processes to address the symptoms. It pays little or no attention to the underlying causes. It is a business that relies on supply and demand, and the public has created the expectation that there is a pill for every ill. That's just the way it works. So what we have today is an impossible task. You cannot fit a liter into a 250 ml glass. In the Old English, it was you can't put a quart into a pint pot. And learning outside your field of competence is a slow process because you're looking at new concepts with pre-programmed eyes. And as Einstein famously stated, the thing that gets in the way of my education is my learning. No, that's wrong. It's the other way around. The thing that gets in the way of my learning is my education. Yeah, I'm going to have to fix that. That's what happens when you do it at 2 o'clock in the morning. All righty. So everybody prides themselves on saying, I think outside the box. That, my friends, is a trap. Because when you say that, you're accepting that there is a box outside of which you have to think. That is the limitation. We are limited by our boxes, which is what we've been trained in. There is no box. You cannot divide the human being into a series of boxes. Everything is connected to everything else, and all aspects have to be conceded. And you know who the greatest anatomy teacher ever in history was?
No.
He was an African American born in 1935. His name was James Earl Godwin, I think it was. And he was a preacher and he was a songwriter. And he wrote a song called The Foot Bones Connected to the Ankle Bones Connected to the Shin Bone. And that is what is missing in education today. Everybody concentrates on the foot bone, and I become a specialist in the foot bone. And somebody else is a specialist in the ankle bone, forgetting that they're connected. They are connected. Believe me, they are connected. So look what we have created. A multi-trillion-dollar medical industry. A $10 trillion health insurance business. A $200 billion annual research funding. Researching what? Billion-dollar drug companies, all making the US health system the most expensive out of 33 OECD countries. And the tragedy is, the largest single cause of bankruptcy in the United States is medical debt.
Wow.
Chronic disease is on the rise, and 1 billion people in so-called developed countries have disrupted sleep. And this is the major cause of comorbid disease. And the reason for this is that policy dictates practice. The reams of instructions as to what may or may not be done by an individual modality, the boards, the oversight boards, the supervising boards, this is what limits the success of the intervention. Everybody's told, stay in your own lane. For fear of reprisals, should they venture into anything out of their scope of practice. For heaven's sake, who defines scope of practice? 60, 70-year-old Neanderthal troglodytes sitting in a board saying, I'm a representative of the board of pediatric neurology, and this is what I say your scope of practice is. They are way out of touch. Harsh penalties are imposed for any infractions of these rules. And this results in tunnel vision, where the focus is fixed on the symptoms and little heed is taken of the origins, which are usually outside of the specific field. So the sad truth, as evinced by Keynes, who was a brilliant man, worldly wisdom teaches that it is better for reputation to fail conventionally rather than to succeed unconventionally. Government, peer, legal, and insurance pressure discourages people from making changes. Gold standards and best practice. This just means that most people are doing the same thing. It doesn't mean that this is the best way. just the most widely used. So here are some facts, and this information comes from a variety of sources, largely the OECD health data figures from 2013 and 2019. And this will have altered substantially in the COVID and post-COVID environment. Of the 33 listed OECD developed countries, the US alone spends more than double the average. You can see that. This is the OECD average, and this is what the US spends per person per year. Its outcomes are generally the lowest when measured by cost and life expectancy. That's insanity. To spend all that money and get virtually the lowest outcome, there has to be something wrong. And this is one of them. The costs of administering the system are out of all proportion to the outcomes. The CEOs of major pharmaceutical companies earn around $30 million a year each. The directors of major clinics earn $5 to $6 million a year. And this is without stock options and all the other bonuses and things that are added to the package. This is the main reason that US healthcare is unaffordable. It's heavily weighted in the area of administration and remuneration. Look at the life expectancy in the US. It's way down here. It's on a par with Estonia and Turkey and Slovakia for the expenditure of so much money. And these lower countries spend well below half of what the US spends annually per capita. Look at the high costs of medical visits in the US. They result in one of the lowest incidences of doctor consultations of just over 4 per year, compared to nearly 14 per year in Japan. This has led to a massive increase in the growing reliance on Dr. Google for information, because Dr. Google is free. And this has led us to the situation where disease management makes dollars and health creation only makes sense. And when we're talking about a multi-trillion-dollar industry where the heads of these companies and clinics make so much money, there is no incentive to kill the goose that lays all those golden eggs. So these are the two different worlds I was talking about. Roughly 1 billion people worldwide who suffer from disrupted sleep. They need to be helped. They need to be treated. And in the majority of cases, they require intervention. And this is what we were talking about yesterday with Ken. The various methods, the various sleep studies, the various interventions. These don't solve the problem. These address the symptoms. And the symptoms and the problem are usually two very different things. Then, of course, on the other side, we have the hundreds of millions of newborns, infants, toddlers, and children who are developing problems that will push them into the world of intervention. These problems can be identified early. They can be addressed early. They can be treated early, so we can stop the flood of new cases of sick people pouring into a system that cannot even handle what it has at the moment. My friends, we have a chasm. And the medical world and the dental world are peripherally involved in trying to solve this complex issue. One uses sleep medicine, and the other uses dental sleep medicine. Well, why should sleep require medicine? Sleep is a natural physiological function. And why should dental sleep medicine have anything to do with anything? Because the problem is not dental. The problem is not sleep. The problem is not medicine. The problem is function and behavior. And neither of these professions has the required in-depth of training and understanding to be able to solve the problem. Both are trying to address it from their own perspectives. And that is why we are struggling. What is required is a new discipline that bridges that gap. And that discipline is airway. And I'm committed for the rest of the days that I'm blessed to be able to draw a sane breath every day. I am committed to turning airway, functional airway management, into a profession, into a course, into a master's degree that is going to bridge that gap and is going to prevent people from falling into that pool of disease. There's a knowledge gap. It's not possible to learn all disciplines in any 4-year course. And what is missing with airway is the knowledge and understanding of the biochemistry, the physiology, psychology, and the behavior of the total airway. Not the ENT airway, which is the nose and throat. Not the dental or the orthodontic airway, which is the jaws and the cranium. Not the pulmonological airway, which is the lungs. The whole airway, beginning to end. And that is the purpose of creating the e-course that I have done. Do you realize that behavioral physiology is a 4-year degree course in its own right? It's unreasonable to expect anyone in medical, dental, or other professions to have the required training, because the course is as long as their initial course. So in the absence of this, there's a partially informed base of people who have information. And information is not knowledge. I read a book by an expert. I did a weekend course online. You cannot learn anything overnight or in a crammed weekend warrior program. Breathing is such a complex and individualized process. No two cases are the same. And just because something appears on the internet doesn't mean it's accurate. And just because somebody used something that worked for them and you tried it and it worked for you doesn't mean that it's going to work for everybody. And these are the caveats that we have to be so careful of. And I'm active on a lot of sites, and some of the questions I see on those sites and some of the answers from people who've read James Nestor's book, that is their total training in breathing, and they become experts overnight. And they start dispensing advice to people as to what to do. I tell you, the 4 hairs that I have left on my head jump up and down. So the reality is that life is a breath-to-breath process. It is nothing else. And survival is the same as being able to take the next breath. And you know, if you fail to take the next breath, it's all over. And that is where the focus has to be, on the airway and the ability to take the next breath. Airway is not a medical issue. Breathing and sleeping are normal physiological functions. They're not diseases. We don't need to have disciplines devoted to common sense. We need to get away from this technological trap, and we need to open our eyes, and we need to look, and we need to observe, and we need to see what is going on. And as I mentioned to Ken yesterday, what is going on with sleep studies is people are treating numbers. They're not treating individuals. And if this number is 4 and this number is 6 and this number is 12, you have this and you need this. It just does not work.
And according to insurance companies.
Definitely.
Not even according with the real way that we should be reading these sleep studies.
No, you will do this because that is the cheapest product that we're prepared to pay for.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So the thing is, medicine only becomes involved after the fact when the dysfunctional patterns have caused the systemic breakdown. So I'm not sure how many of you are aware of this, but in the first 6 months of life, babies are breathing an average of 65,000 breaths a day. Think about it. And think about this as a possibility. What happens if the birth process is problematic? What happens if it's a very long labor? What happens if eventually it has to be an induction? What happens if there's an epidural? What happens if it's forceps? What happens if it's vacuum extraction or a C-section? Is that baby going to breathe freely when it comes into this world? Is its first breath going to be an easy breath, or is it going to be a compromised breath? And if it is a compromised breath, and that little infant has to create some kind of parafunction in order to be able to take the next breath, because this is what survival is all about. You do not survive if you can't take the next breath. And that newborn little mite makes this compensation. It could be tilting the head. It could be arching the back. It could be anything. Multiply that by 65,000 times a day from day one. And you think there's a possibility that this is possibly where things might start going wrong? But look at the difference. These figures here in the gray-green are what it should be. These figures here in the pink are what is accepted today as being normal. These numbers are not normal. These numbers are commonplace, but they are not normal. So because of this dysfunction,
we are live on Facebook.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
The majority of the population is basically unwell and suffering from dis-ease or average health. And these averages here are taken from unwell people and are not indicative of the score of well people, yet they are used as the norms. This is where the system is falling down. And eating and drinking for 2 people is not a great idea. Well, let me tell you, breathing for 2 people is not a great idea either. And have a look at the large group that we're working with here. They're breathing 50%, 60%, nearly 80% more than the body was designed to cope with. And if you have a system like your airway system, your nasopharyngeal and your oropharyngeal airways, they are designed to move a certain volume of air. And that air is between 4 and 5 liters a minute. The channels are designed for that. Everything is designed around that. That is the way the body is designed. Well, you start pushing a tsunami, and I always have to smile when Renata tried to explain how to spell her last name. And she says, a tsunami, like in tsunami.
Without the two.
Am I right?
That came from my husband. Yeah, tsunami without the two. Nami.
Yeah, okay. Well, the minute you push this tsunami through the nose, through the sinuses, through every part of the system, you are going to get interference. You're going to get inflammation. You're going to get congestion. You're going to get infection. We are doing this to ourselves. It is not happening to us. So we need a health village. We need a team of people who can ask and answer the 5 WH questions. And we'll come to those in a moment. Because these questions give us a different perspective. What if we changed our approach from focusing on the symptoms attached to the patient, and we started looking at the patient attached to the symptoms? What happens if in the profession, the hygienists, the dentists, the orthodontists, lift your loop and look? Put your loop down. Do your due diligence. Look at the teeth attached to the person, and then remember, those teeth did not come onto the dental chair by themselves. They were attached to a person. So you should look at that person and you should ask 5 critical questions. What is the problem? Not what are the symptoms? Why did it happen? And don't just accept that it happened. Oh, the teeth are crooked, I have to straighten them. This crown is broken, I'm going to have to replace it. This tongue is sitting in the airway, I'm going to have to pull the jaw forward. You can't just accept that it happened. We have to know, why did it happen? We want to know, when did it happen? Was it recent? Was it a trauma? Was it an accident? Or was it of long duration, perhaps even going back to birth? We want to know, where do we start in order to address the etiology? And of course, most importantly, who is the appropriate person to address the prime issue? Very often, the person who fixes the symptoms does not have the training to understand why this happened. And this is why, only after we have asked those 5 questions, should we look at the, how am I going to fix this? The world is back to front. Everybody walks into a doctor or a dentist, and the first question is, how am I going to fix this problem? They don't even know what the problem is. This is the disconnect. And this is called healthcare. We have to breed early awareness. People need to look for things. They need to look that open mouth could be a warning sign. They need to tell their children, constantly pushing off one leg is going to create postural imbalances. Kids should be taught with their scooters. You scoot up the driveway on your right leg and you scoot down on your left leg. These are the innocuous things that are happening every second of the day that people don't look at and don't realize and don't understand that this is the hotbed of dysfunction, and it can be addressed very early. This requires a homely, friendly environment, not a stern medical office. And that is where dentistry has such an advantage. This is famous Bondi Beach in Sydney. This is a Sunday morning. This is the Nippers life-saving training. There were hundreds of parents and coaches at this training. Amongst those parents were doctors, nurses, dentists, physiotherapists, personal trainers. Did anyone notice or comment on this group? You know the statistic? 3 out of 4 children between the ages of 5 and 12 have crooked teeth. I did not select these children. They were part of a Nippers training team. There were 4 girls of the same age. Look at the growth potential of the one with a closed mouth as opposed to the other 3 with open mouths.
And each one of them has something different.
Absolutely. What you're seeing is so commonplace to the point that it is now considered as being normal. And I promise you, not one of those doctors, nurses, trainers, or physiotherapists even looked at those teeth. They thought, these kids have got crooked teeth, they'll get braces. This is anything but normal.
Wow.
So to quote the words of one of my most respected friends and colleagues, Dr. John Coyce, all of us know more than any of us. And that is why, with this human organism that is so complex to be understood by any one group of health professionals. We have to do what you guys are doing now. We have to create a circle. We have to create a circle of understanding. We have to have a bin at the door which says, place ego here.
Yeah.
This does not work when ego rules the waves. And
You're
this is
absolutely
why
right.
the current medical system cannot handle the problem. It's overregulated by Medicare and insurance. It's heavily influenced by the threat of malpractice and litigation. It has limited time per consultation. 7.38 minutes is your
Wow.
basic consultation time. It operates in isolation. The doctor sits behind a desk in a small room with an examination table and a chair for the patient. It's isolated. The doctor's role is to diagnose, prescribe, and refer. There's no time to identify the cause. And it uses the across-the-desk approach where my job is to fix you quickly. By the time you get to see the doctor, you're already sick. And back in September last year, on the 8th of September, the Sleep DT News interviewed a whole lot of doctors, primary care physicians. 78% surveyed lacked confidence. They blamed limited training in medical school, the fact that the courses are all intervention-based. They understand the importance, but the time constraint stops them from doing anything. All they can do is recommend a sleep study, and that covers them in case anything goes wrong. Then you get the conflicting outcomes that we discussed with Ken yesterday, how different labs use different software, different algorithms, different percentages. It's madness. It is total insanity as to what is going on. And everybody's going, la, 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 la. That's the gold standard, and that's the way we do things.
Everybody wants to come up with their own thing. They want to be the ones to.
Failing. It's not working. It's failing. And then, of course, you get your patient resistance. So where do patients go for help when the system has failed them? That's where I believe they should go. Because it's primarily a behavioral disorder. It's a dysfunction. It's not a disease. Dental teams are in a better position to identify and educate. Behavioral change is a team effort, not a lone doctor sitting behind a desk. And dentists get to see people while they are still well. This is the key, this is the brilliance, where if the dental team is trained as to what to look for from the first dental visit at 12 to 18 months, which is the way it should be, we can pick these things up and head them off at the pass. But the stumbling block, the thing that gets in the way of my learning, is my education. This time I got it right. Okay.
Yes, I
So-
always tell my patients, and being in the dental office, all you guys listening to this, if you're a hygienist, you are in such a perfect position to be able to be an advocate for these patients. You are the one who's spending 45 minutes, if you work in a good office, right? 45 minutes to an hour with these patients. You get to ask them questions, how are you feeling today? How was your sleep? How many patients fall asleep in our chair? It's not because you're a good hygienist, because they have some, breathing issues while they're asleep. So we are in the perfect place. This is beautifully put.
So here's your challenge. Life begins at the end of your comfort zone. Tell me about it. I've spent my entire life outside of my comfort zone. And I still am.
Wow.
And I have my 81st birthday in 2 weeks' time, and I'm still outside of my comfort zone. And I love it, because that's what gives me life, and that's what gives me purpose, and that's what gives me meaning. And I'm not scared of upsetting the status quo. And I'm not fearful of upsetting set routines. And I'm not worried about entering uncharted territory. And fear of criticism from the medical community says more about who they are than who I am. And I don't care what my peers say. They don't even know me. Whose story do we believe? Socrates said, do it yourself. Start asking questions until you find contradiction. Concerned about patient resistance? Well, of course your patient is going to be resistant if they don't know what you know and if they can't see what you've studied. And that's why I've created these courses that give you certification showing the topics that you have studied and passed. And sometimes it's simply not having the confidence to make the move. Well, I don't think I'm short in that area of life. So here's the summary. The sickness dam is overflowing. And the only possible way to manage this is by slowing down the number of people getting sick. Disease management doesn't do that. People simply don't know that they are not well. And they believe that's just the way they feel. Average health has become the new normal. Modern medicine is prolonging the process of dying. We're not living longer. We're dying longer. And that's awful. And everyone asks, how? Without ever finding out why. And so the intervention machine grinds on, and the same failures are experienced. Now is the opportunity to make a real difference. If not you, who? If not now, when? This statement goes back to 110 BCE. It's a long time ago. This was quite a smart guy. That, my friends, is the introduction for today. Thank you so much for your time.
Roger, you are wonderful. Thank you, thank you, thank you so much. Oh my goodness, what a gift on Friday night, guys. I'm not sure if we're able to see comments today. If you are listening right now, I know it takes a couple minutes before you hear me, but if you're listening right now, type something in the comments, type priceless in the comments so I know you guys can, that we can see your comments right now, and post your questions. If you guys have any questions, we're going to wait about just a few minutes to see if anybody has any questions for Roger and see if he can answer. But this was wonderful. It was the first time that we did a live presentation like this. And my goodness, you are a wealth of knowledge. Hey, Chris. Chris is on.
Well, to answer your question, was I actually wrote and produced the entire Demystifying the Airway program.
You're kidding.
Yeah, I do all my own slides. I do all my own illustrations.
Wow.
I never knew I could do it until I had to, because nobody else understood what I was doing.
I was just having a conversation with the websites tonight, website guys that help us with the website, the agency 365. And they were like, Renata, stop messing with the website. I like to just do everything, and I need to step back sometimes. Okay, you guys take it on.
Yeah.
But
and
my goodness, it is wonderful.
I kept it under an hour because there are going to be questions. There are going to be, well, how do I do it? Where do I do it? Why do I do it? When do I do it? And it's not possible to cover everything in an hour.
Mm-hmm.
I can cover the concept of what has gone wrong. And the fact that if we continue down this path, which, by the way, has been going for 50 years, since the time that Christian Guilleminault and Bill Dement were having a beer in Stanford, and they decided that this interruption to sleep should be called something. And Guilleminault said, what should we call it? And Dement, who was a Greek scholar, said, why don't we call it apnea? which is Greek for no breath. Hey, he said, that's a great idea. Let's have another beer. Okay, so what is an apnea? Oh, it's a cessation of breathing. Right, cool. For how long? What about 10 seconds?
Exactly. Why? Why is
Not
that?
9 seconds, not 11 seconds, not 5.8793666 reoccurring seconds. 10 seconds was an arbitrary figure. So 10 seconds became the benchmark. Then after another beer, the question was, well, what happens if it's not a complete cessation of breathing? Whew. Wow. Let's look for another Greek word. Let's call that a hypopnea. Okay. How much of an apnea is a hypopnea? Ooh. What about half? Yeah, okay. Time for
Wow.
another Pabst. Okay. But some labs use 30%, some use 60%. There is no commonality in what they do. So then they said, well, look, we've got these two numbers. What do we do with them? Well, let's add them together and divide by the number of hours the person is sleeping. Oh, great. Okay. Well, why don't you just put in your shoe size and your grandmother's age when she died? Because they're about as relevant. So we came up with the AHI, the apnea-hypopnea index, which on the 15th of May last year was completely trashed in a journal by 10 independent physicians worldwide. They said it is completely unscientific. It has no validity whatsoever as a diagnostic norm. It's useful. It's useful in how it changes. So if your AHI is 75 and 3 months later it's 42, all it means is that things are improving. So then you've got the BMI, which is another load of rubbish. The BMI is not an individual measurement. The BMI is a group statistic that was created in 1792 by a Belgian mathematician by the name of Quetelet. And Quetelet said that if I take a group of people, and if I take their weight and divide it by their height, I'm going to get a number. But that number was kind of clunky. So he said, well, why don't I square the number and then divide that into the weight? Squaring a number is mathematical sleight of hand. It has nothing to do with health. So weight divided by height squared has got nothing to do with anything. It's a mathematical statistical number.
Wow.
And Quetelet said this is not for individuals. So he applied it to tall, thin Scandinavians and he got a number. Then he applied it to short, squat Polynesians and he got another number. But what happens if a Polynesian marries a Scandinavian? And you start trying to work out their BMI. So through usage, the requirement for CPAP is BMI plus HHI.
Wow.
It does not work. It has not worked for 50 years. And it will not work for the next 50 years. And by the way, you will get all of this stuff in that course. I saw your registration come through last night.
Yes, I started it today. It was wonderful.
Yeah, so everything is in there. That is a 10-hour introduction so that you will understand what airway is, how it originated, how the problems that we're facing today developed, and what is getting in the way of resolving this situation.
Wow. I do have one question. bringing back to those little girls that we showed, of course, whenever we look and we're looking at the teeth and we're looking at the facial growth and we're looking at the muscle tension, trying to close those lips. We're looking at that. But I love your cut, by the way. But I was one of those
subtle
girls,
plug. Yes.
That is why I'm here today, because I was one of those kids who had tons of allergies and really bad bags under my eyes, allergic rhinitis, and sneezing all the time, mouth breather. And my dad had sleep apnea, undiagnosed sleep apnea. We know it is, and I call him every day, telling him to go to the doctor to get something done. But I'm ignored anyway. Hashtag dad go to the doctor.
What do you know anyway? You're his daughter.
But after after this lecture, I don't even know where to send him anymore. What is the first step? So growing up, I have a high vaulted palate. I know that I'm going to maybe when I do hit what is it called whenever you hit you lose your hormones, menopause. Sorry.
Yes.
Whenever I hit menopause, I have a higher chance because my structure is not good. My molar to molar palatal width is very narrow. So the structure is not in my favor right now. And I might be looking into maybe having some of these issues when I hit menopause or as I get older. What is your recommendation? What should somebody like me, because I know there's plenty of people out there whose parents have sleep apnea or UARS, what should we be doing in our 30s?
I'll just take you back to 1962 at Columbia University. The professor of craniofacial orthopedics and orthodontics was Melvin Moss. And Melvin Moss made a statement. He called this his functional matrix hypothesis. And the hypothesis was that bone does not grow. Bone is grown.
Mm-hmm.
So you can picture the little osteoblasts sitting around there waiting for something to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing's going to happen until pressure is exerted on them. And that, of course, is amplified when you think of the growth of the skull. Does the brain restrict its size to the size of the skull? Or does the pressure of the growing brain put force on the osteoblasts in the cranium, allowing the skull to grow to its genetic potential?
Wow.
The same applies to the orbits. Do the eyeballs shrink to fit the hole in the skull? Or do the orbits, under the constant pressure of the eyeball, grow to their genetic potential? So that's the penthouse, that's the ground level. Now we go to the basement, which is the maxilla. The maxilla should grow to its full potential under the consistent pressure of the tongue. But with most people, the tongue does not, yes,
low, I'll show,
does not give consistent pressure. But that does not mean that the genetic potential for the full growth of the maxilla is not there. And that potential can be released literally at any age. And this is the craniofacial epigenetics. This is what is behind those various techniques, like the ALF and like the facial beauty with Steve Galella and with the Vivos system and with Ted Belfour in his homeoblock. It's all about encouraging the maxilla to reach its full genetic potential by stimulating what was stopped earlier on through lack of function.
That is perfect.
So
I
one
know
of the
what I have to do.
dentists I work with here is currently, two of them are actually currently going through homeoblock with Ted Belfour, and they're in their 30s. And after 9 months, they've already experienced several millimeters forward growth in the maxilla.
Wow.
Because the potential is there. But every case is different.
Of course.
And what I've learned after all these years I've been involved with dentists and with orthodontists, it's not the appliance that fails. It's the training that that particular person has in the utilization of that appliance. And this is where Martha Cortez has so much experience.
Yes, it's wonderful.
Okay.
A lot of times she told me that a lot of times you might need more than one appliance, you know?
Yes.
Because they're all different.
And the faces are all different. And the underlying etiology is all different.
Mm-hmm.
So this is why there's no one size fits all. There's no one set of breathing exercises that works for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
There's no cookie cutter process in health. But to understand the individual, you have to know how to ask the correct questions. And this is what it's all about.
Mind blown. We have a question from Ruth.
Sure, Ruth, shoot.
Let's show it. How do we get this into the education program? As an occupational therapist, we learned about activities of everyday living, or ADLs, one of which is sleep. However, we learned very little about how to help people sleep better. We did learn all about one-handed dressing techniques, though. So my question is, how to educate a professional who's already helping people with sleep, ideally before they have a problem, is a more preventive manner than treatment post-problem?
Okay, Ruth. Perfect question. And the answer is in that bridge that I showed you between medicine and dentistry. And that bridge is called functional airway management. And one of my goals before I depart this mortal coil is to get a master's degree, a 2-year master's in functional airway management. I want to establish that course.
Sign me up, I'll help.
Yep. It doesn't exist. Believe me, the treatment of ulcers 30 years ago was surgery or antacids. This concept of ulcers being caused by Heliobacter did not exist. It took 2 Australian doctors 10 years and having to infect themselves before the medical profession eventually said, oh, we thought that the bacteria would die in a pH of 2, which is the stomach. Therefore, it couldn't be bacterial. And then they proved that the bacteria burrowed into the wall of the stomach to escape the acidity.
Wow.
We have to think completely differently because the dogma of the old-fashioned belief is what's holding us back. So, Ruth, the answer to that is to take your OT profession, to take the PT profession, to take manual therapists who understand the structure of the body, to take qualified hygienists, and to teach you on top of what you know, the other little nuances which bring everything together and make it into a cohesive pattern. And that is the goal, and that is what I'm working towards.
Who is a qualified professional to help people with their breathing issues?
Predominantly somebody who understands the entire body. And this is where I have an argument with the term myofunctional therapist. Myofunctional therapist is a therapist addressing musculature in the whole body. You guys are orofacial myologists.
Mm-hmm.
Physical therapists and occupational therapists are myofunctional therapists. They just haven't done the orofacial bit.
This is interesting. One of the first courses I ever took in Brazil was by Adriana Tessitori, who's absolutely wonderful. And it was on whole body muscle. I mean, It was everything from head to toe, so different than anything that I've seen here.
So when
you're absolutely right.
training, where do you stop? Do you stop at the genioglossus? Do you stop at the SCMs? Where do you stop?
You can't. You can't. That is true.
There's always another layer that you have to understand.
That's
And
where
this is where the usage of a word starts defining who you are. You are not a myofunctional therapist.
Or a facial myologist. That is
You
great. I
are
like
a certified orofacial myologist. How would you do if I started getting you to do foot exercises?
Exactly.
You weren't trained to.
Some people are. I was not. Yes. Some
Exactly.
people. A lot of people in Brazil do it, but not me.
Yes.
Not
And
yet.
Brazil is way, way ahead.
And I remember Adriana Tessitori saying that, like, if you have an issue all the way up here, I'll ask them to do a foot exercise to be able to work all the way up here.
And why do you think that happens? Who was this guy called Newton, whose third law says for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. But it's not predictable where that reaction is going to be. So you have to understand the entire structure before you can venture a solution. Right, Chris, newbie question.
You're absolutely right.
How does jaw growth in later life impact dentition bite alignment? For example, if someone only needed mandibular advancement. Okay, well, that's a very, very complex question because mandibular advancement is not something in its own right. It has to be relative to cranial structure. It has to be relevant to occlusal patterns. It has to be relevant to prior treatment. You cannot treat the jaw that has not had extractions the same way as you treat the jaw that has had extractions. Because structurally, the two things are now different. All I can tell you is there is no single answer. Every case has to be looked at in its own right. You have to drill down until you get to the etiology of the problem. And I might be a little biased here, but the etiology of the problem is survival. And the human body will create whatever dysfunction, parafunction, or compensation it needs to take the next breath. This question is for the dentist and the hygienist. How many of you find you hold your breath during the day while you're working?
All day long over here.
Why?
Catch myself all the time. I'm holding my breath.
What are you doing?
I don't know.
You're facilitating the next breath. Because you couldn't take the next breath functionally if your breathing biochemistry was out of balance. So by holding your breath, you build up your retained carbon dioxide levels, which shifts the pH, which balances the chemistry, which allows you to take the next breath. You are having daytime apnea.
Oh, Lord.
That's what it is. That breath hold is a balancing mechanism to get the pH balance correct.
That is so interesting. And I didn't notice that until, I'm not sure if it was in a book that I read, but about holding your breath during the day. I never noticed I did that. And my chiropractor over here is amazing. And she did a test to see, my sympathetic system, my parasympathetic system, all was working. And I'm like, I got this down. I've been working on my breathing for 5 years now. I am quiet breathing, barely moving, and my sympathetic system was way up. And I'm like, how is this possible?
Do you know why?
Tell me.
Because the breathing technique that you developed according to what you were taught was not in harmony with your body's chemistry. Wow. This is a common issue with heart rate variability. People sit on the HRV and they struggle to get to coherent breathing, to get to 6 breaths per minute, 40% inhale, 60% exhale. You put them onto a capnometer and you check their CO2 levels. They are disastrous because they're compromising the biochemistry to get the mechanics right.
Wow.
One of the top Buteyko educators in the US, out in Seattle, lifetime, he's in his 70s, been a lifetime body worker. He's been a lifetime trainer, highly respected, lovely, beautiful human being. He's been teaching breathe soft and low. His control pause was an average 48, 50, up to 60.
Wow.
We put him on the capnometer. His end-tidal carbon dioxide was 25 millimeters mercury. He was chronically hyperventilating in his attempt to breathe low and slow. That's what he'd been teaching.
Wow. How
Suddenly
do
he
I
realized,
go ahead?
no? How do you what?
How do I get that test done? Who does it? The capnometer.
Where are you? You're Georgia.
Savannah.
Savannah. Yeah. Jasmine.
Oh, awesome.
Jazz
I'll
has
call
got
her.
capnometry. She actually did the courses with us through the graduate school.
Oh, amazing. I'm
So
gonna
she's
call
got
her.
everything. Yeah, and she's just an angel in disguise.
Yes,
She's
she
just
is.
amazing. So Jazz will certainly do an evaluation for you. Barry
Thank you. But
Rayfield has several of these throughout his practice. There are lots and lots and lots of dentists, the enlightened ones.
this is important for people that are listening to know if you would like to get a test like this done. So ask your dentist.
Excepting
They're
very few of them know. It's better
Mhm.
for them to email me and give me their location, and then I'll tell you if I know anybody in that area who's done
we
the
are
training with us.
we are building the Airway Circle directory also. So
Yeah,
hopefully a lot of those dentists on the Airway Circle website, a
yeah.
lot of those dentists know what we're talking about here. So they're a lot more likely to be able to help you in that regards if you'd like to check your CO2 levels. I think that is super important.
All right.
Great
So,
point.
question: which is the more important gas in oxygen transport?
Well, if you look at, everyday TV life, what everybody thinks is oxygen. Everybody needs oxygen to breathe, right?
Right.
And
What
survive.
is more important than the oxygen?
Well, we all know it's CO2. Most people
Right.
don't.
Good. We know it's CO2. How many people measure an oxygen saturation?
I have one right here.
Everybody.
Yeah.
How many people measure CO2?
We're here. We're trying to find out one person. It is so to have 2 states away.
Exactly.
Look at this.
It is
We are
as
so broken.
important to know your CO2 levels as it is to know your oxygen saturation.
So now, next question. What is a normal level? What am I looking for when I'm looking at my CO2?
There's an optimal level, a functional level between 38 and 42 millimeters mercury. I see
Perfect.
30 to 40 new patients every month in 6 different offices.
Wow.
Most of them struggle to get to 35.
Wow.
And they can
And
see instantaneously on the biofeedback graph that as they push their levels up by changing what they're doing, their symptoms disappear.
wow.
Then I bring them down below the line and drop the CO2 retention, and the symptoms come back. So they
Wow.
make that link between watching that breathing graph and the CO2 levels and the way they feel.
That is unbelievable. Why
Yeah.
are not more professionals, medical professionals looking at this is just, it blows my mind. And I know
Because
that we
it's
are
not
over an
part of
hour.
their training. It's not part of their training.
And there is, I mean, I meet with orthodontists, and I ask, how about, light wire extension, or let's start, early intervention. And what about this? What about, I didn't learn in school. I actually just called my professors and they've never heard about it. And I'm like,
That's right. That's right.
so we're not even going
And,
to look into it,
and I'm a specialist and you're not even a doctor.
Definitely.
And
But
many people have said to me, you're not even a doctor. And I said, that's from choice.
exactly. Definitely.
I do not want to be registered to the point that I'm controlled.
Gosh,
That's why I'm
a
a free
rabbit.
spirit.
That is a rabbit hole that we need a whole nother hour for. And I know that we're a little bit over time, but I just thought about something that I would like to touch a little bit on, and nitric oxide.
Yes.
So we're supposed to increase our nitric oxide, but recently I heard somebody say that no, you do not want your nitric oxide to be high. I recently had blood work done, and that was the only thing the doctor told me. By the way, your nitric oxide is low. And I'm like, that's interesting. I've been working on my breathing. It's not working.
Okay, what is the content of atmospheric air? 78%
Oh, nice.
nitrogen,
Mm-hmm.
21% oxygen.
Mm-hmm.
It's not surprising that nitric oxide is made virtually in every cell in the body
Wow.
because the body is saturated
Mm-hmm.
with both nitrogen and oxygen. What the key factor is the enzyme. And that enzyme sometimes is lacking.
Mm.
And that is
Is it
that synthase enzyme which takes the nitrogen and the oxygen and creates the nitric oxide. So you have parts of the body where that enzyme is more proliferant than in others, and particularly in the sinuses,
mm-hmm.
provided you breathe gently, the movement of air triggers the manufacture and release of nitric oxide as you inhale gently. But it's a byproduct of the breakdown of the oxyhemoglobin bond. It's nitric oxide is literally all over the place because it's a vasodilator,
Mm-hmm.
and it's also very powerful antimicrobial. It's been there since Pontius was a pupil pilot. I mean, it's not something new. It's just the awareness is now growing,
Mm-hmm.
as has the awareness of the link between breathing and malocclusion. And this is what John Flutter and I built over 20
Mm-hmm.
years ago. And I'll get him on the program. I'll drag him out of
Yes.
bed. He's in
Yes.
London, but I'll drag him out of bed. He's great fun.
We'll plan. Roger, thank you so much. This has been a wonderful hour. I am so appreciative, and I'm so happy that I got to meet you over here the way that we've been doing this past year with the pandemic. But thank you so much for your time. You were wonderful, and I know that we're going to have many more meetings
My
together
pleasure indeed.
to learn from you.
And I wish you a good evening and a happy sleep.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful night.
Bye.
Thank you, guys. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.